My name is Adam Gollner, and we're here in Montreal, Canada. And I'm a journalist who writes about music and culture and travel. When I write about music, I like to examine issues that touch on a broader spectrum of concerns. Like, I recently wrote a piece about ethics in the Montreal music community, and it was a chance to discuss the belief systems of a number of musicians in this city and to ask them why they do what they do and to be able to understand what motivates them and ultimately what goes into creating their art. So when I write a music article, I like to get into something that perhaps goes a little bit deeper than just the surface level and try to get into the motivations or the perhaps not the ultimate motivations, but to try to understand why it is that we do what we do. And for me, music journalism has been a way to do that. That everybody is different and everybody has a different reason for doing it, and that there is no single consensus amongst people in this musical community, just like there's no single consensus amongst musicians in general. And I think that people do it for a variety of reasons, and it's up to each of us or up to each musician to decide why it is that they do what they do. Music journalism consists of a handful of elements. I think you have, on the one hand, music criticism, which is where one person discusses the merits, in their opinion, of somebody else's music. That is one form of music writing, music criticism. Then you have music writing, where you could write about a style of music or a band and what it's like being with them, and that is an immensely broad form of writing. It could be anything. It could be anything from hanging out backstage with a band and writing about your experiences in a first-person manner, to exploring something such as what goes into a certain scene, what makes a scene. It could be very broad. So I see a distinction between criticism and music writing, in the sense that one is more opinion-based and the other is more broad. It could be seeking to explain something, or it could be more experiential. It could be immersive. It could be something where the journalist brings you into this world and allows you to experience what it's like being around these musicians, or even making this music. You know, some writers are able to capture the process of creation, and so those are some of the components of music writing. I think it's mixable, certainly. I'm a firm believer that we can all do whatever we want and whatever we choose, and we look to critics because we respect their opinions, and we say, you have a knowledge that will inform my decisions. And that's why we go to a critic, and I think there's a place for that. That person who could be very smart and very well educated and be a great critic may also be somebody who has a great voice as an investigative reporter or as a storyteller. Just because they have really strong opinions doesn't mean they wouldn't necessarily be a good storyteller. So, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't be a good musician as well. So I see no problem with overlapping, and I guess that's an idea that has been around for a long time, exploring all these different aspects of ourselves and of creation, going back to the Renaissance and l'uomo universale, somebody who dabbles in a variety of media and who tries things out. And I see nothing wrong with that, besides potentially being branded a dilettante, but that's, that goes with the turf. the best critics have strong opinions, and we want them to have strong opinions. We want their opinions to shape our opinions, and we look to them as pillars, as voices who know what they're talking about and who are able to help us know what we want and how to choose out of this forest, this vast forest of limitless choice. And we these are our shamans in this consumerist jungle, and they can say, this particular choice will be right for you for these reasons. And of course, we may not agree with them, but that's what we look for. We want them. We seek them out for their opinions. There's a kind of gray area today where we're at in terms of a critic being able to reach a wide audience. And how is it that one particular person can create a career out of speaking to a vast audience when they work at perhaps a specialized publication? It's put in a simple terms, we're seeing more and more critics these days. We're seeing a lot of people who cater to specialized desires, and the internet has seen the proliferation of that, where we can go to a certain website where we know the critics from that website have the same taste that we do, and we can see what they like. So they're out there collecting information and then dispersing it to a very specialized audience. So there's a sort of crisis in traditional criticism today, or traditional media is a better way of putting it, in that we can turn to hyper-specialized outlets to find what it is that we're looking for. So, and that's great for the consumer, because if I like a certain type of wine, I can find a certain type of critic who specializes in that region and that grape varietal, and he will know which are the great ones. And then that leads to a whole suite of other problems when that one critic becomes too powerful, perhaps, or perhaps that critic's voice can start affecting the products that he's discussing, because people will start trying to create products that this critic will write about and that this critic will like. And that happens in music as well, and you see that today with certain specialized websites that are very powerful and that have a command over their readership or viewership, or their audience, the people that go visit that website. And if that website gives a great review to that album, it will do well. And if it gives a bad review, well, too bad for that band. And so that's another kind of crisis of criticism, is that the things you say can affect the destinies of other people. I'm not a critic, and I'm not somebody who's opposed to criticism, as many artists are, who feel that there should be no criticism whatsoever. But I see it both ways, and it's an eternal debate. I've always been interested in trying things out and trying to learn about how they work, and I am a very curious person. As a writer, I get to, as part of my job, learn about things and then try to explain those things that I've learned to other people. My job is to go out there and learn, and then make it accessible to somebody who doesn't have the time to go experience these things firsthand. And I do that in a way that is rational. I write nonfiction and journalism. It's about facts, and it's about trying to explain the way things are. As a musician, I get to experience something that doesn't necessarily deal with the world of facts, and something that is less concrete. I could say pure in some way, but all of these words are just adjectives. It's a different form of creating. Music, when you're playing music with somebody, you are communicating with them in a way that is non-verbal. You're communicating on another dimension, and it's very simple. I mean, you're communicating. You're creating harmony. There's one person playing a melody and there's another person playing a melody, and out of those two things comes a harmony, and that to me is a profound experience. And actors can have that experience when they act, when they are able to get out of their head and just be in the moment. And painters can have that when they can capture the light on a certain subject that affects them profoundly. And all artists can have that. Through their art, they are able to access another world that is inside this world, and it's a mystical notion, and yet it's the simplest notion in the world. And anybody who has played music with somebody else recognizes that feeling and that moment. And to me, it's one of the greatest parts about being alive, is that communication. And I've also explored filmmaking, which involves working with a broad group of people, and making music videos, which involves trying to tell a story that goes with a certain song. And all of these things are fascinating to me, and all of them are about learning and ultimately about communicating and trying to express ourselves. And I don't see why people shouldn't try them all. Being an artist in more than one media can help you in some ways and can hinder you in other ways. It can hinder you in the sense that being very specialized and dedicated to your one medium can allow you to become a master of that form, and can allow you to really understand the intricacies of whatever it is you're doing, because you just spend more time with it and you understand it more and you're able to hone your craft. But at the same time, a positive aspect to diversifying your abilities and to working in different fields is that you get to understand what all fields have in common, and also what creation ultimately entails. And so I think that there's benefits to both aspects. And of course, when you try other things out, you learn. And for me, one of the greatest reasons to exist is to learn more. And I really enjoy that about trying new things out. My biggest motivator is curiosity. I just am endlessly fascinated by the forms that surround me, and the fact that there are so many things in this world that we didn't know about or don't know about and have yet to experience, and that motivates me. And as a writer, that motivates me. Communicating motivates me. Expressing myself motivates me. Being able to have a relationship with someone else motivates me, and being able to have the sort of relationship through art where I can communicate with a broad amount of people motivates me. And learning motivates me. I don't know, so many things motivate me. It's really hard to bring it down and to reduce it to its essence, its quintessence. I mean, we're all here on this planet, floating through space, trying to figure it out. And why not try things out that could perhaps help us learn why we're here, and that could make it enjoyable, and that can make it magical? Collaboration is not essential to all art or all creation, but collaboration is a very vital part of most forms of art. And collaboration is a very special thing. It's a very complicated thing. And out of collaboration, wonderful things arise. When two people get together and make music, something special happens. When 25 people get together and make music, something special also can happen. And when 300 people get together and make a film, something special happens. But when you're just one person sitting down to write, something special occurs then as well. There's different necessities for different art forms, and collaboration can be very messy. It can be very difficult, and some of the greatest collaborations have also been some of the most difficult relationships. But art doesn't necessarily need to be collaborative. There are great stories about great examples of solitary poets, teenage poets, Rimbaud or Shuggie Otis, a California musician in the 60s who, before the age of 20, created a masterpiece created an album of sunny California pop wherein he recorded all the instruments. It was not collaborative, but it is a beautiful piece of art. So there are no rules. It just, and in the boundaries between these rules, or these non-existent rules, there is all sorts of, there's room for things to happen. And so, I don't know, collaboration or non-collaboration, they're both great. How did Montreal get on the map musically? It's a very complicated question, and it involves many things. I don't think you could just reduce it to a single episode or a single band, but a number of things went into making this phenomenon what it has been. So I think on the one hand you had a place that was and is very affordable, and that has always attracted young students with its cheap rents and with its general beatnik bohemian way of life. It's very cheap to live here, and you can have a great quality of life here. There's not really a rat race in Montreal because traditionally there hasn't been a great economy here over the past couple of decades. So it's been a city that in some ways was struggling because of language wars and between French and English, and this province nearly separated. I mean, we have to bear in mind that 10 years ago there was an election here, a referendum on whether Quebec should leave Canada, and the vote was 49.6 to 50.4 in favor of Quebec staying in Canada. So it was close. I mean, you have a place that has been divided. But after that referendum, people just said, let's just forget about that for now, and let's get back to enjoying our lives here with all of its confusion and all of its, I guess, bilingualism. And it's not perfect for anybody. And many people in this city feel like outsiders, whether they are the francophones who feel like outsiders in this country and in this continent, or whether it's the Anglophones who feel like outsiders in this province, or whether it's the people who have come to this place from the outside. So it's a kind of weird mix of outsiders. Everybody feels like an outsider. And I don't know if that's something that has gone into making this place a great bohemian center, but it is a great bohemian center. And all of a sudden, the world just seemed to start paying attention. There's always been great music from Montreal, but in this town where there was no pressure from any industry, there's no music industry here. I mean, 10 years ago, if 50 people went to your concert, you were very lucky. There wasn't, I mean, for indie or for pop or for small bands, there wasn't very many bands coming through here either. But over the past couple of years, I mean, it's just exploded. There's tons of concerts here. There are many people going to concerts. There are many more bands than there had been, but there's also support for those bands. And people outside just, I think, started paying attention because a spotlight came onto Montreal in a bigger way. And just Montreal, all of a sudden, I mean, in terms of a tourism destination and in terms of its food culture and in terms of its art culture, all of a sudden Montreal became noticed. And that's a media phenomenon where certain things will catch on. And I think we've noticed how there's a cyclical nature to phenomenons, and how certain things come in trends, come in cycles. And I think it was Montreal's turn in some ways. It had been so forgotten by the rest of the world. Nobody really was paying attention to this city. And then what was next? Montreal fit the bill perfectly. It's so special. It's French, and it's English, and it's cheap, and it's amazing, and the food is unbelievable, and it's just a great city. It's a world-class city, and it happens to have amazing bands here and musicians who have been able to hone what they do in an atmosphere without pressure from an industry, who have, or at least were, able to play tiny concerts and rehearse for several years without any sense that the rest of the world would pay attention. So it was quite pure artistically, which has changed somewhat. Nowadays, you do see industry here, and you do see people getting signed all the time. That was not happening 5 years ago. Nobody was getting signed. It was such a distant impossibility that people were just playing shows to just do it. It was not like a business possibility. There was no business aspect to it. Everybody was broke, and you just played music because it was something to do. But nowadays, there are a lot of A&R people here, and there is a lot of business potential, and bands are aware of it. And whether that will ultimately be for the better or the worse remains to be seen. Is it a good idea for a band who is looking to get signed to move to Montreal? It's definitely a good way to bring antagonism into your life from this community. People in Montreal are very, Montrealers, or even people who have lived here for several years, are quite vehemently opposed to the industry, the music industry. And that's something that is an aspect of this scene that I find fascinating. And so if you were coming here to get signed, you would be ostracized. And if you do get signed and you are from Montreal, you will be ostracized unless you have found a way to manage that. And it's a complicated subject, and it's a fascinating subject. But, for example, the Arcade Fire chose not to sign with a major label. They're on an indie label. Now, the Stills signed to an indie label that is part of a bigger label, and there's some resentment towards them for that reason. Why that is, I mean, it's not easy to explain, but it would just go to show that if you did come here to get signed, it might not be great for your social life. I don't think there is one particular style of music that makes the Montreal sound. I think there are bands that are playing folk music that is getting attention around the world. There is heavy metal, there is underground hip-hop, there's indie pop, there is, techno soul music, there is electronic. There's a ton of music that is happening here that is attaining recognition internationally. But some of the bands that have been getting the most ink or getting discussed the most are bands that play the kind of soaring, emotional, almost orchestral indie pop music that we associate with the Arcade Fire, Wolf Parade, Islands, and a number of other bands that are great. One of the biggest articles to discuss this music scene, and something that really helped give this music scene a big push, was a cover story in the arts section of the New York Times that spoke about the music here. And the author's explanation of why this scene is happening is that it happens to be music made by English people in this French city. And he was flawed in that assumption, I believe, because I believe that this city is a mixture of French and English. And I believe that if you look at the band that was the centerpiece of his story, the Arcade Fire, they sing in French in certain songs. And several of their members are Francophone. And other members come from other provinces and other countries. And if you look at the Stills, they're Francophones. And if you look at, which was another one of the big bands that were mentioned, they also happen to speak English, but they're not English. They're a mix, just like the Arcade Fire is a mix of these different people. And so I found that to be inaccurate. I think the city is not a case of English people in a French place. I think it's a case of English and French people in an English and French place. And that's what makes it interesting to me. But it's a complicated matter, and I'm sure that there are many opinions about it. So I personally love living in a French city. And I think that this is a place that has had to protect its identity from a surrounding sea of Englishness. It has had to find a way to survive, and it hasn't been easy for Francophones, but at the same time, I think they've done a very good job of protecting their distinct culture. When I went to school here, I went to a French school, and I'm so grateful for that. I speak French, and I'm so happy about that. At the same time, it's an ethical battle. It's not easy. It's not simple. It's a complex matter. It's divisive. Between Francophones themselves, there are different opinions and attitudes towards separation and towards separating. And as far as how we're doing today, I mean, this city is doing fantastically right now. It is experiencing tremendous economic growth, and there are more opportunities today for people than there were when I was younger. But at the same time, separation still remains a possibility. Will it happen? We don't know. But it's kind of one of the things that keeps living here exciting, and it's what makes this place what it is. But what is so fascinating about the separatist movement here is that it hasn't been violent, except for a few very selected incidents. It has been a pacifist separatist movement, a very civilized separatist movement, and at the same time, a difficult separatist movement. Half of this province wanted to separate 10 years ago, and half of them wanted to stay. I mean, how much more divisive can you get than that? How much more? It's very balanced. It's a very balanced place, but it's special, and it is like nowhere else. Becoming a journalist is not an easy. It's not easy to become a journalist. It takes time and it takes dedication. You have to be prepared to be totally broke for a number of years because you get paid very little, especially at the beginning. So my recommendation for anybody who would like to become a journalist, whether they're a music journalist or otherwise, is to just start doing it and write things that you don't get paid for, just to get published. Because once you start doing it, other things will come, and you just need to start and be prepared to do it for nothing, just like you would do in music. You would play concerts for nothing, just to play a concert. And if you stick with it long enough, things will happen. In my case, the way it worked was I spent a number of years just doing that, getting paid nothing, just writing and learning about how magazines work. And I also did an internship at a magazine where I did everything from selling ads to distributing the magazine and learning about how it worked. But that experience taught me that this world of journalism is doable. And so once I had done that, I started writing bit by bit for other places, and after doing it for about 10 years, I started writing for larger publications that paid quite well, such as the New York Times or Condé Nast publications in the United States and newspapers in Canada here. And then for me, it has always been about writing a book. So journalism, even in the early days, I felt like I was learning how to write in order to be able to write something of a greater length. And the way you get a writing contract to write nonfiction is you do enough journalism at enough big places, and then you create a proposal for a book. And you can get an agent if you have written for big publications. Some people don't want to write books. That's fine. The top of their pyramid or their goal is to just be writing or perhaps editing. Editing, some writers realize that they want to be editing. And then some editors realize they want to be writing, which is what happened to me. I was the editor of a couple of magazines, and as I was editing other people's work, which I know how to do and which I enjoyed, I realized that I enjoy writing more than I do editing. And it was a strange realization, because it's kind of assumed when you're a journalist that the way to make a living at it is become an editor. It's a job, and it's not freelancing. And you could also become a staff writer, but that comes with its own set of constrictions, because any place that will pay you to be a staff writer is probably a place you don't want to be working, unless it's a very great magazine. And there's not too many of those. But editing is a way to get paid. And if you know how to work with words, it's not too difficult. There are various ways to get into music journalism. 3 ways that we could identify right off the bat are freelancing, or being a staff writer would be a second, and the third would be editing. Now, the first one, freelancing, involves writing stories that you are either commissioned to write by an editor or that you pitch to an editor. There's not too much security in freelancing, and there's not too much money either, but there's a lot of other benefits to the job, and it's a very exciting form of work. Staff writing is something where you actually have some more security than you would have as a freelancer. You have a job, you get paid, you go into work, and you write stories. That normally happens at a bigger daily newspaper or a magazine. And then a third way of working in journalism is as an editor. An editor edits stories that are written by the journalists. And it's still a very creative job, and it involves helping make a story better and helping the writer shape their story. And editing is a different set of skills than writing, but still very rewarding. And it depends on your personality, which one you like the best, and it depends on which road you choose. Do you want security? Or do you want the rebellious man of the road freelancing trip? You can choose. So those are the 3 elements that go into journalism. As the editor of Vice magazine, my job was to develop stories and commission stories with writers and listen to their pitches and try to help find stories that would work for our magazine. And once we had commissioned the stories, once the writers were out there writing the stories, to discuss with them how the story was working out, and then once they had submitted the story, my job was to then actually work with the words to make the story flow, or to help the story get across in the best way possible. And that involves a whole host of minute details, but oftentimes it's very structural. An editor works with the structure of a story, and perhaps you have something that is your before last paragraph that would make a great opening paragraph, and oftentimes it's kind of just slotting things in different places to help the flow of the story work better. And oftentimes it's trimming, it's taking out the excess fat, and there's a constant battle between editors and writers, and I definitely have lived it from both sides. But I think that's an example of collaboration in writing, and it's different from poetry, for example. In poetry, you just do your poem. You don't need an editor. But in writing, especially nonfiction and also fiction, an editor can really help your story be told the best way possible. And that's what we do. The future is wide open in Montreal. Many things could happen here. I think that the media spotlight will move on to another place soon enough, as we've seen in other cities that were hotspots of the moment, Seattle, etc. Montreal happened to be one of those places that caught on. I think there will still be fascinating art that will emerge from this city, because I think there's a very strong sense of community here. And I think there is a strong sense of ethics here as well. And I think there are deep roots in this city, musically, creatively, and otherwise, that means that it won't crumble once the media attention has moved on to the next destination. I think that because of the fact that we have a number of music kind of community centers like the Casa del Popolo, where bands can play every day of the week, and because we have so many musicians here, and because we just have a whole network of artists and musicians and creators supporting each other, I think this community can't help but continue to grow. Now, whether that will be something that grows in a mediated way, I don't know. But there will definitely still be great art coming from the city. My current project is a book that I'm writing about the world of fruits and about our relationship with the natural world and with fruits in particular. And it's a travel book, and it's an adventure book, and it doesn't have much to do with music. But when I think about why is it that I find fruits so interesting, I do see a parallel to the same reason I'm so passionate about music. Both of them make me happy. Fruits make me happy, and listening to a great song makes me happy. And there's something so ineffable about that. It's undescribable, but why is it when you have a perfect mango that you're happy, just the same way that you feel so great when a certain song hits you in such a powerful way? I mean, these are mysteries, but I am certain that the future will bring more opportunities for me to examine these mysteries and to learn about them. Finding one's voice is a very mysterious process, and there is no simple set of rules that will help you find your voice. The only thing you can do is practice your craft and stick with it and get into it on a deep enough level to be able to communicate truthfully. Jack Kerouac in On the Road speaks about a saxophone player who is able to, in his words, blow truth. And just truth came out of that horn. And that is a saxophone player who knew what his voice was. And finding one's voice simply means being truthful to yourself and blowing truth. But that's not easy, and you can't just commit pen to paper and instantly blow truth. It doesn't just happen like that. You have to stick with it, and you have to keep on doing it, and you have to learn about it, and you have to work at it, and you have to be disciplined, and somewhere down the road, in a mysterious process, you may have found your voice, and you may not even know it. And I think it's something that is very intangible. I don't think you ever say, I found my voice. I know what my voice is. I think the entire artistic process is about finding your voice. And it's not a journey that is about getting somewhere. It's about the journey. Finding one's voice is a journey. And the end point is always infinity. Ethics are a very important part of journalism, and ethics are also a very important part of music, whether we realize it or not. Journalists, however, have to confront ethics on a daily basis because they are dealing with facts, and they are dealing with items of a sensitive nature. And to distort the facts may be something that is ethically permissible in a fiction context. It's all about context, and when we speak about ethics, it is about context, and ethics is not a neat division of rules. In different sets of circumstances, different rules apply. For a journalist, one of the greatest ethics is to tell the truth to the writer's best ability. Because one thing we learn quickly as journalists is that truth is a very fickle mistress. Truth is not easy to access, because my version of the truth, my version of what's happening out there, is very different from your version of what is happening out there. Yet both of our versions are real, and they're both truthful. But the second we realize there is more than one truth, that's where problems arise. But as journalists, it's our duty to attempt to tell the truth to the best of our ability. Fiction writers, however, can bend those rules and can tell stories however they want. So context is very important when we speak about truth, because a fiction writer's truth perhaps could be of a deeper, more profound truth than a mere stringing together of facts by a journalist. Facts and truth, there's a messy relationship there, and it's not simple. And there are no simple rules, and it's a fascinating realm to investigate as a journalist and to learn about. Ethics for music journalists, some of the simple situations one can encounter. One thing that's fascinating to me about music journalism is that magazines get free CDs. They're given CDs for free. They're given these gifts to write about. They are free. It's almost like a bribe. It's a small bribe, but it's unethical. Yet that's the way the industry operates. You are getting something. You're being given something that you will then write about. By its very nature, that is unethical. But that's the way the industry operates. It's a gray zone. Do I have any problem with it? No. But is it ethical? Depends on your attitude. And it goes to show how ethics are very personalized. Another sticky situation one could find oneself in would be befriending a band and then being asked to write about their new album when one may not like that album. I mean, I've never found myself in that situation, but what are you going to do? Are you going to tell the truth, or are you going to write a fluff piece? What about when you're getting paid? What about when you're getting a paid vacation to go hang out with a band in the Bahamas, and you have to write about that? Are you going to say that it sucked? Are you going to say that the band was crappy and strung out? And are you going to say that you noticed, the sadness of the tropics? Are you going to talk about how we've been exploiting the resources of developing nations? Or are you going to talk about how the band rocked and about how, you got drunk? Some music journalists have really explored that boundary and created amazing stories. There's a school of new journalism in music journalism, and journalists such as Lester Bangs or Richard Meltzer. If I get that wrong, just dub in Richard Metzger. I'm not sure what his last name is. But there's a school of new journalists who basically would write very first-person accounts of their dealings with the music industry, such as being invited on tour with bands and being given all sorts of gifts, from free meals and free booze and free women, and writing about that reality. And it created very interesting stories. So that's an example of a journalist speaking truth to power in its own depraved way. I mean, it's almost a sad story to read that, but then you get brought into that reality, and it's almost a desperate story. But the machine, the hype machine that creates stars, is based on inequality, and this system we live in is based on inequality, and what are you going to do about it? What is your attitude towards this inequality? And are you trying to make it better, or are you trying to make it worse? That's something I think we all must ask ourselves, and it doesn't mean we need to become saints, but it's just an important thing to consider, these aspects of what we do. And as journalists, it's our duty to examine those aspects. I could talk about journalism and what makes it important for hours. And my advice to young journalists, or at least my philosophy about journalism, is that it's very important to be true to yourself. And that by that I mean, if you have beliefs that are important to you, it is important to bring those beliefs into the work you do as a journalist or as a musician, which is something we see here in Montreal, where musicians are very ethical. As journalists, you have an opportunity to speak truth to power, to use your publication to communicate to a large public, and to therefore say something that you believe in and something that you think is true. And I think that is a responsibility that is very profound. And I think that it's something that we can lose sight of very quickly in certain forms of journalism that strictly cater to consuming and to shaping tastes and to creating desire. So I think that if you're a journalist, or you're interested in being a journalist, you're getting into it because you're interested in communicating, and you're interested in sharing with people, and you're interested in expressing yourself. And I think you have to remain true to that. And I think it's very easy when you get hired to write about the latest trend to lose sight of that responsibility. And so I think that as a journalist, when you are hired to write about that latest trend, it is your duty to find a way to bring some meaning into what you're writing about. And that is the challenge of the journalist, is to speak truth to power. And it's not always easy, and it doesn't mean you're going to get the next assignment, and it doesn't necessarily mean that what you write will even get published. But that is your duty, and that is what you are supposed to do. And you have to, at the same time, try to create try to figure out what your voice is. And I think that's an ongoing process. And that's a more writerly concern. But the process of discovering your voice is also the process of finding yourself. And that's an extremely philosophical notion. And it's something you can only experience by doing. And so, hey, if you want to be a journalist and you stick with it, who knows what you'll discover about yourself and about this world. I'm so happy I pursued journalism, and I couldn't have known the places that it would take me, but I have been able to travel around the world and meet incredible people and learn the most astounding things, and every day brings a new discovery and a new epiphany, and constantly I'm surrounded by fascination. And so if you ask me if I'm happy whether I pursued it, the answer is yes, very much.